Now I've got light.
Okay, I think it's going.
So this skills presentation is about nonverbal communication. And initially I was going to do it about rapport building, which is nonverbal communication with other people. And then I actually watched a TED Talk by Amy Cuddy. I think that's how you say her last name. She's at the Harvard Business School. And it sort of broadened the way that I was thinking about how we build rapport and how we perceive ourselves. And then I also managed to connect it back to all of the yoga training that I've done. I've spent a lot of time going through a yoga teacher training. And so I figured out a way to incorporate that all that I think will be useful for everyone. So first, I just want everybody to become aware of how you're sitting right now. Notice if your legs are crossed or your arms are crossed. Notice if you're fiddling with something or if you're leaning against the wall or anything like that. So just become aware of what your body is doing right now. I learned about rapport building in a really interesting setting. When I graduated from college, I moved to Utah, and I was working for a wilderness therapy program, which we affectionately call Hoods in the Woods. So these teenagers who were adjudicated, who had usually gone through the court system for some sort of transgression, or their parents just sent them because they were up to bad things at very different levels. Then they would have to spend 7 to 12 weeks in the wilderness backpacking and learning communication skills, and we teach them about ecology and how to fend for themselves in the wilderness, stuff like that. So I would work 8 days on, 6 days off. And how to build a rapport with a person who is 14 years old, and some of them were even like kidnapped in the night by big Samoan dudes. Wow. So to build rapport with this person, who really the only thing I had in common with is that we were close to the same age when I was doing this work. I was 22 or 23, and I had been 15 years old recently, but that was about it with a lot of these students. So we were given tools to be able to communicate with people beyond what we could say to them. So the first thing I wanted to start with was if I were to have a student in the beginning it was like this. And so I'd be sitting on a rock or on the ground and like this. So can anybody guess how you might want to communicate with that person in a nonverbal way?
Take the same posture?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that in human nature, and you'll see this a lot in interactions, we instinctively go the opposite way. So sometimes when we see someone like this, we come at them like this. And oftentimes when we're confronted with someone who's like this, we quite often make ourselves smaller. So it's almost against our nature to communicate in that way. But when you're dealing with someone who you want to build rapport with and they're like this, you stop with them right there. So aside from just my body language, how else do you think I might communicate with this person? How else can I match their style if we're talking about something?
Speaking slowly and quietly.
So if they're speaking slowly and quietly, to match that as well. So if I've got someone that's like, I really don't want to be here, I really hate it here, then instead of saying, hey, it's all right, you're gonna be fine, you'll survive, you just also start there with your head down and matching all of those things. And so you're mirroring and matching this person. So then to lead them out of this, if you start here and then slowly start to sit up straighter and to put your hands at your side and to put your chin up, ultimately you can lead that person out of that posture. And so this
Does
can
that take days, weeks?
It takes, it depends on the person, it takes 10 seconds to a couple minutes. And so quite often this is taught and used in sort of a business strategy way, and if you're communicating with someone and in slight ways they're going like this, or if they're twirling their hair, or if they're touching their arms, a way to build rapport non-verbally is to start there with them. And then if you're going like, if you start to go like this and doing their things, what's interesting then, and this is fun, and also I think it should be used cautiously. If you start to touch your nose, they'll start to touch their nose. If you start to go like this in your ear, they'll start to go like that in their ear also. So this stuff really works, and it builds rapport in a really unique way. We are physical creatures, and this is an interesting way. So the things that I wanted to emphasize, it's volume, it's tone, it's the speed of your speech, all of those things. If you can bring yourself to that person's level and then move out of it to the space that you want to be in, then that's a really effective way to build rapport. Another example from working in the desert in this wilderness therapy program is quite often I mostly worked in boys groups, so it would be 3 instructors and 9 students. And although we did have women who would sort of violent reactions, the men would too. And we don't have any sort of weapon or backup or anything like that. So this was our main tool of defense if we had someone freak out and start throwing stuff and start getting really violent. And so you all can probably imagine what you might do if someone is doing that. Does anyone want to take a guess?
Mirror it right back at them.
Exactly. So, and the important thing to remember when you're dealing with someone aggressive like that, this is a very important side note in general in dealing with people, especially as Thanksgiving is coming, we all maybe have to deal with people that we don't like to deal with, is that when you're dealing with someone who's maybe upset or frustrated about something and moving their arms, you match that too, and you bring your voice up to their level, and you can slowly start to bring your voice down and bring your movements in. The important thing is to be next to them. Because ultimately, if you're facing each other, when you're doing this and you've got this big problem, you become the problem. So when you're looking at someone, and that is, and they're talking about a problem, they're looking at you, that you've been identified with the problem subconsciously. So the idea is to have both of you gesturing away. So ultimately the problem is out there. It's not with you. So this is a really effective tactic. And I mean, sometimes I end up sliding around to be next to the person so that we can gesture away. Very effective. The last thing I wanted to talk about from this experience was one of the times that I was working in a girls group, we had a young woman have her first schizophrenic break. And so this meant that we were dealing with someone completely unpredictable, and we really didn't know what was going on. She was babbling in ways we really didn't understand, and she was really unpredictable. She was picking up rocks, and she was threatening people with them, and she was stomping off into the desert, and we can call back up and say, hey, can you come out and help us with this person? Because we might end up, this is not a safe situation, but it takes them hours to get to us. So one of the most interesting things I ever saw was my co-instructor standing there with her, and she had a rock in her hand, and she was really agitated. And Emily stood next to her in that same sort of stance, and then she was just talking with her. Even though she was hearing a lot of babble, she just kind of matched all of her movements. And slowly as this went on, Emily dropped her hands to her side, and the girl dropped her hands to the side. And then Emily ended up squatting on the ground, and she was tracing something in the dirt. And the girl came right down with her. And it was really unique and really, for someone who wasn't even in her own mind in a way that she could access it, she was able to keep her calm just through body movement. So it's a really powerful tool. Let's see. So what does yoga have to do with this? So what yoga has taught us is that, especially in Western society, that our body can have a huge impact on our minds. An example is if you were to hold a pen in your teeth like this for a minute, and sort of have that almost fake smile feel, that you will actually feel happier when you're done. Our body can bring our minds to a new place. And so one of the things with yoga is if you're not feeling grounded, if you're feeling really scattered, if you're having a really stressful time, like everything feels like it's swirling around you, yoga would tell you that's a lot of vata, it's a lot of air, a lot of wind. And so there is a physical remedy for that. Does anybody think of like a yoga pose, if you know it, that might be a good one for that?
Oh my God.
Yes, exactly. Downward dog, child's pose. I'm doing this in a skirt, I know. If I'm down on the floor like that, it is a really effective way to get grounded. You're physically close to the ground. Another thing is if you're feeling really stagnant, yoga teaches us that we can move. You know, you don't have to always just be in one pose like this. You can be moving back and forth. And so I think that that is one of the things to realize is that when you can't break your mind out of something, your body can do it and your mind will follow. And so this one, so it's not only that body language and our nonverbal communication can influence others, it also hugely influences us. So when I was watching this TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, she was saying how your body language shapes who you are. And the example that they gave was in a stressful job interview. They had people prepare for this interview, and the 2 minutes before they went in for this job interview, and in the job interview, the person who was doing the interview sat like this, which is apparently worse than getting heckled. To have no reaction from a person is really stressful and traumatic. And so ultimately, they had two groups of people. One that sat like this, like as if you were playing with your phone or something like that. Sort of like a posture like this or like this before the job interview for just 2 minutes. And then they had the other group sit in power poses. Can anybody guess what power poses might be?
Like sitting really straight out.
Yep, so basically the power poses, it's interesting, some of these are really difficult in a skirt, by the way. But this is one of the power poses. So you sit like that for 2 minutes. Another one, and I definitely can't do this in a skirt, is if your legs are apart and you're leaning back. I could even just do it with my legs closed. Exactly like Jess is doing right now. So you're leaned back. Another power pose is the Wonder Woman pose. So people stood like this for 2 minutes. That's it. And the final one, which I love, and this is like a pose that people choose across cultures to express triumph and victory, is this one. So people would stand like this for just 2 minutes. And then they went into the job interview, and they got worse than heckled. And so they had to interact with this person for 5 minutes, and then they left the job interview. And so then a completely separate group of people had to choose who they wanted to hire based on their interactions afterwards, and based on the video that they saw of this person. They couldn't even hear any audio or anything like that. Almost universally, they chose the people who had been in the power poses, who had been like this for 2 minutes beforehand. And so ultimately, that body language had not only influenced themselves, probably in how they interacted, people wanted to choose them, to work for them, because of their stance, because of their nonverbal communication in that job interview. And so, let's see, I don't want to leave anything out. So what does this suggest about nonverbal communication?
That it's as important as verbal communication.
Yeah.
That leads.
Yeah. That ultimately the sort of take-home point here is that you don't actually have to feel confident going into a job interview. You don't actually have to feel really solid doing it. Ultimately, you can fake it till you make it. And that's her point that she makes, is that if you stand like this for 2 minutes, like Wonder Woman, I mean, yoga would tell us too that this is a pose that is ultimately so vulnerable for us. We don't like to be vulnerable. We're exposing our hearts when we're doing this. And so ultimately, you're showing yourself in a way to this potential employer that you might not even be aware of. But ultimately, you're exposing yourself, and you're also, even as you feign confidence in going like this and going like this, you ultimately fake it till you become it. So I think the most important message behind all this rapport building and the yoga is that it helps you relate to others, but it also really helps you relate to yourself. Knowing and connecting with your own physical body can have a huge impact in your life. And as you interact with other people, I encourage you to look around and see how people are sitting, the people who are in positions of power or where you want to be, and just notice how they're sitting, and notice how you're sitting in those interactions too. And if you just change your posture in a meeting or something like that, how it frees your mind up to interact in a whole new way.